Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Jarrell Miller remains unbeaten after stopping Romanian prospect Bogdan Dinu in the 4th round of their fight in Kansas. So this was an interesting fight because every round was a little bit different, and Dinu, he had a little bit of success, but Jarrell Miller's body work, his pressure, it ultimately caught up with Dinu as many fans expected, and Miller finished him off in the 4th round. He was actually dropped twice in that round, first time by a left hook, dropped him heavily. That was a left to sort of the top of the head, and then the second knockdown which ended it was basically Miller swarming him, throwing lots of shots, lots of leather, landing, and Dinu, he didn't beat the count. He didn't look like he wanted to beat the count, and it was all over. So Jarrell Miller, it was a relatively good performance. It was certainly a very good-looking stoppage. But in terms of the overall fight, so there were some things here that were good for Miller and bad for Miller. We'll quickly go through them. So that first round, it was a bit of feeling out. Dinu was working the jab. He was using the ring as we expected. And it was a really even round, and Jarrell Miller was having some trouble tracking him down, and Dinu managed to land an overhand right at the bell. It was one of these things in the fight that was quite obvious that that right hand was there for Dinu, you know, occasionally. And Miller, he could have some trouble when he steps up to better competition, because what became evident later in the fight, or through the fight I should say, is Dinu really didn't have the power to trouble Jarrell Miller. So Miller was effectively trying to walk through his shots. The right hands, Miller was basically just eating them, and he was getting away with, you know, being open to them. Round 2 was a really interesting round because Dinu, he basically boxed Miller's ears off. Miller completely went MIA, and it was a clear Dinu round. A good activity. He was able to tag Miller, you know, often with shots, lots of jabs. He was tagging with right hands. And Miller, he tried to do a fancy little sort of swivel with his head, sort of, you know, doing some fancy stuff there. It was quite comical in the end because Dinu just tagged him with every single shot that he threw. Round 3, Miller got the instruction to actually go to work, be more aggressive, and he did. And he looked better, pouring on the pressure, having more volume, which is the sort of style that we've become accustomed to. That is his wheelhouse. And for all his talk of wanting to throw more quality shots and that sort of thing, ultimately it was the pressure and the volume that really started to get to Bogdan Dinu. And some of the body shots that Jarrell Miller started investing in from the first round, didn't throw as many in the second round, but some of that work started to pay off, and Miller landed a lot of really good body shots in round 3. And Dinu, he didn't like it, and he was starting to slow down, and there was actually a shot that hit Dinu. It was about the belt line. It dropped him. It was ruled a low blow, but the replay, for me, it clearly showed that that was a legal shot. I thought it was on the belt line and it wasn't low. But Dinu, he went down like a sack of spuds. He was given a little bit of time to recover, but clearly a Miller round. And ultimately, round 4, Miller continued to pour on the pressure. It became too much for Dinu. He was dropped twice and it was all over. So in terms of the finish, very good from Miller. But in terms of the fight itself, well, there were some things, I think, other fights, you know, if you were Alexander Usyk and you saw that, you would be able to use your footwork, your speed and your movement to effectively evade and potshot Miller at will. Someone like Tyson Fury, I'm sure, would love to jump in the ring with Jarrell Miller. But other guys that aren't as nimble, that aren't as fleet of foot, they may have some real issues with Jarrell Miller when he does step up to a fight that fans want to see him in with. And that's the point here with this fight, because we can't over-exaggerate what Jarrell Miller did here and how much credit he deserves, because he was facing a guy who was 18-0, a prospect who basically really hasn't had a step-up fight. We didn't know what to expect with Dinu. We thought, you know, he would box well and do some nice things, and he did, but it was the result everyone was expecting. It effectively was another cherry pick for Jarrell Miller. But Miller did his job, he finished it in a good fashion, and he moves on. And I do wonder about his mobility in this fight, because after the second round he looked like he was sort of nursing some sort of leg injury, potentially just a little bit ginger, and after the fight he was trying to stretch that out. So potentially maybe he's just strained something here. But in terms of the what next, now that is the interesting part. And I did miss the post-fight interview, but I'm sure he was talking about Anthony G-String Joshua, as he always puts it, saying how Joshua was ducking him. I'm sure that came up, and I'm sure he mentioned Dillian Whyte's name as well. Calls him a spoiled beef patty, and he wants to fight him. I think some of the Whyte talk and, facing the winner or the loser of Chisora and Whyte, some of that, in my view, has come about because he potentially knows that he's missed the boat with this Anthony Joshua fight. For 2019 at least, because Joshua, is only going to get one voluntary shot, potentially in April, or it could end up being a mandatory for the WBO, depending who wins in December. But we'll have to see. But Miller's place in the queue, it's a little bit hazy about where he can fit it. But with everything going on and Kubrat Pulev, the IBF mandatory, waiting in the wings, Jarrell Miller looks like he won't be in luck for a title shot with Anthony Joshua anytime soon. So that obviously begs the question, what next and who next? And I've heard some interesting things from Miller on that. Obviously, he's talking about Whyte. He's got this whole thing, he wants to beat a Brit. But at the same time, he also said in an IFL TV interview that he would like to line up Freza Kendo, Manuel Cha, and Trevor Bryan. He'd like to face all three of them, and he'd like to do it in a short space of time. And a lot of those guys, that would actually be a continuation of the fights that we really don't want to see. But I guess, in terms of Miller, he's got this fixation with the WBA regular title, and obviously he's been trying to get a shot. There's been this whole messiness with Manuel Cha. Miller is at number 2. There's no guarantees what's going to happen here. But, if he's going to face guys like a Kendo, Cha potentially, and Trevor Bryan, well, that could fill out most of 2019, but he's probably still not going to get a lot of the respect that fans, that he wants from fans, that he's saying that he has earned. Because a lot of people do want to see him in the fights like a Dillian Whyte fight. And if he was able to make that fight, I think that would be fantastic. But I'm not going to get into Jarrell Miller too much on this because he is saying the right things, but hopefully in 2019 is more of a year where he's backing it up, as opposed to facing Thomas Adamex and Bogdan Dinu, because we called this one as a bit of a mismatch on paper. Dinu, a prospect, didn't really know how good he was, that he had some skills, and he showed that, but really he was overmatched. The body shots really took it out of Dinu. He didn't like it. We'll have to see where Miller goes to next. But what did you make of the performance? I thought Miller did what he had to. He looked good at times. Then in other, spots in the fight, he looked decidedly average and, pretty one-dimensional. But when he did pour on the pressure, when he really put it on Dinu and sort of flicked the switch, he looked kind of unstoppable. But when he's not doing that, he's highly hittable, and he could be in trouble if he gets clipped with a right hand by someone like a Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.
If you want even more boxing content, come and join me on Patreon.
Every week on a Sunday, I drop a new video on something topical or thought-provoking from the heavyweight division, ranging from rankings, the business of boxing, the false economy of deluded fanboys, the twists and turns in the division, to assessments of fighters and their statements. I hope to see you there. And for more information, go to patreon.com/boxing squared. The address is on screen now.